There we go. All right. So the Picassos of the American South. And this is one of the men that Margaret Renkel here is going to be talking about, William Edmondson. And this is a picture of him from the 1930s. And he is a sculptor primarily. And he did most of his work, as it turns out, in cemeteries, which I think is fascinating. But it also means that much of his finest work is no longer with us. It's either been stolen by people who know the value of it, or just it's eroded over time. He was active in the 30s and earlier, I think, and so out in the rain and the corrosion and the effects of the weather have made it so that he's not his much of what was in the cemeteries is gone. All right, so she writes, I've never been all that interested in Picasso, but the show at the Frist Art Museum here would be my first chance to see an entire exhibition of Picasso's figures in the flesh. So I rushed to buy tickets before it sold out. Maybe these paintings, drawings, and sculptures would be what made me fall in love with a terrible, brilliant Minotaur. That was Pablo Picasso. Besides, Nashville is the only place in the country where it's possible to see this career-spanning retrospective. The collaboration with the Musée Picasso Paris on the occasion of the Frist's 20th anniversary. How often does a thing like that happen to a city like this? Showing up for it was a civic duty as well as an artistic one. To make the most of my visit, I asked my brother Billy to join me. In addition to being a gifted artist, Billy is also a gifted teacher. I knew he would help me put these artistic works into context, especially those I found troubling, without in any way attempting to excuse or justify the artist himself. I was prepared to be troubled, but I wasn't prepared for how visible the alchemical interaction between world and artist would be. Something about the paintings reminded me of the self-taught artist Howard Finster, a restless, singular mind who lived in rural Georgia until his death at 84 in 2001. Mr. Finster made the plywood leopard that sits on in a bookcase in my family room. Billy bought it for me on a trip to the artist's studio, Paradise Garden, nearly 20 years ago. So we can look briefly at. So you can see what some of the work that Howard Finster did. Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I just showed you, right, was brought to mind by Picasso's work. And you can see some of those examples here on the screen. Like Picasso, Mr. Finster made art that hewed to no one's vision but his own. But what the two artists share struck me as much more than simply an insistence on experimentation and originality. Some of the works in the Picasso exhibition seemed almost raw, created not in defiance of an artistic tradition, but outside it altogether. Like everything, in other words, that Mr. Finster ever made. Am I making an ass of myself if I say these paintings remind me of Howard Finster? Well, Picasso was obviously inspired by African art, Billy hedged. It's work that exists outside the academic tradition, like Finster's. And Picasso was clearly embracing it and letting it inform his work. Sure enough, in the very next room, there were 2 oil studies for Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso's great Cubist masterpiece, now hanging in the Museum of Modern Art, along with several works on paper that were also very obviously inspired by the African and Oceanian artifacts he had seen at the Musée de Trocadero. So just to remind you what painting that is. Does everyone remember that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the same room, a placard on the wall included a statement from Picasso. My greatest artistic emotions were felt when the sublime beauty of sculptures made by anonymous artists from Africa suddenly appeared to me. These works by a man of religious faith, passionate and strictly logical, are the most powerful and beautiful the human imagination has produced. So obviously had a deep, deep appreciation of even a passion for African art. So I wasn't entirely wrong in seeing a connection, however faint, between the art made by a great modernist painter and the art made by a visionary Georgia preacher. But the little wooden leopard in my family room wasn't the best analog to Picasso's paintings at the Frist. As it turns out, it was just the nearest thing. A better one, as Billy reminded me, is the stone carvings of William Edmondson, who was born in rural Davidson County in what is now Nashville in 1874, and whose parents had been enslaved. During the last 20 years of his life, Mr. Edmondson earned his living by making cemetery headstones and yard decorations, though his work eventually came to the attention of the art world. In 1937, he became the first Black artist to have a solo show at the Museum of Modern Art. He died in 1951. Despite the acclaim his work still enjoys in the art world, and despite a huge retrospective in 2000 at the Cheekwood Museum of Art here, William Edmondson is not a household name, even in Nashville. But he may be yet. Cheekwood recently announced a new Edmondson exhibit that will open in August, taking into account new scholarship on his work. There's another picture of him. And here's another example of his work. Pretty amazing stuff. On the very day of my Frist visit, the Nashville Scene published an article about Mr. Edmondson, written by my friend Betsy Phillips, a local historian. During the pandemic quarantines, Betsy had set herself the task of cataloging every Edmondson headstone still standing in historically Black cemeteries in Middle Tennessee that she could find. After I left the Picasso exhibit, I emailed to ask if she had time to take me to see a few of these gravestones. If anyone's interested in this, I can send you the link. You have the link if you have this article in your email. You can get this link. And here's, I guess that's her website. Okay, so here you can see the one that is still together now. And this one might actually be worth sort of blowing up a little bit so you can see the detail. I don't know if you will be able to see the detail. Like you can almost see the detail of the lettering. It's very interesting lettering. I'm not sure if it really comes through at this point. But I guess this is one of the things that he was known for, as we'll read in a minute. And then here are some birds that he made with his hands, obviously. Betsy's search was guided partly by incomplete prior cemetery surveys and partly by an intimate understanding of Mr. Edmondson's style, his unique approach to lettering, the whimsical shapes of the headstones, the platforms where a carving could rest, an angel perhaps, or a lamb, or a bird, and the particular way lichens grow on the stone stock he habitually used. The fact that lichen patterns on a tombstone is a tell for recognizing the work of one of the greatest stone carvers of modernism touched me in a way I can't even explain. Of all the tombstones we saw that Saturday afternoon, only one still includes the unique carved figure that once rested at the top of most of the stones. The others are gone, the vast majority of them stolen by someone who knew their value or destroyed by someone who didn't. For that reason, I'm not identifying the cemeteries we visited. But even the unadorned stones are clearly marked by the artist's eyes and hands. It's just a little extra than it needs to be, as Betsy put it. I think Edmondson wanted to make beautiful things for the people in his neighborhood. That was his main concern. If the beautiful thing you needed was a gravestone, he could do that for you. If the beautiful thing was a bird bath, he made plenty of those. And if the beautiful thing was a sculpture, he made that. So here's a lamb, I guess, on top. This must be the only one they found that still has it on top. Even in the context of this originality, generosity, and beauty, there is still a huge challenge inherent in any attempt to catalog Mr. Edmondson's cemetery pieces. It's a matter of trying to bridge this enormous gap of time, of both time and racism, Betsy said. In an era when a black man in the Jim Crow South would be lynched for nothing more than looking a white woman directly in the eyes, you just can't overestimate how dangerous it was for William Edmondson to be talented and to come to the attention of white people, especially when the person most responsible for bringing his work to a national audience was a white photographer named Louise Dahl Wolf. So these pictures that I showed you, this one here, right, and the one at the top of the artist himself, those are both, as you can see here, they're both written by Louise, the photographs were both taken by Louise Dahl Wolf. So she was her champion. So many of the great self-taught Southern artists faced the same racism and the same dangers, but continued to make remarkable work even so. I'm thinking of G's Bend Quilting Collective in Boykin, Alabama, whose quilts have been the subject of exhibitions in the most prestigious museums in the country and are now for the first time for sale online. See these women.
That exhibit was here too at the MFA.
Was it? Oh, that's right. I remember that. Crazy that they're on. You can get them on Etsy. That one's so cool. This one is so beautiful here. Oh, you can get a quilted face covering now. That's pretty cool.
Quilted
Might have to get
covering?
might have to get one of those.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
Times called their quilts for 2002 show at the Whitney Museum some of the most miraculous works of modern art America has produced. And here's one, Blocks and Stripes. This is by Mary Lee Bendolph. It's truly remarkable. I'm thinking of Joe Light, the Memphis painter, whose works are in the Tennessee State Museum's collection and in the Smithsonian and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Well, it looks like this is not what we wanted. There we go.
Wow.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Really intense. 1988. Such incredible colors and shapes. It's
Yeah.
so arresting.
Yeah.
Maybe we can try this one again. Maybe let's see what the Met has. Oh, okay. Due to rights restrictions, the image cannot be enlarged, viewed at full screen, or downloaded. So, sorry, we can't look at this one. But maybe we can. Maybe there's something here. It's a very different one. It's a newer picture from 1997. A very different style.
Yeah.
And Sam Doyle, who was born into the Gula community on St. Helena Island off the coast of South Carolina, and whose work hangs in the National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian, and the High Museum in Atlanta. I don't know if they have pictures of him. Pictures of his.
Well, you have the picture of him right there.
That's a picture of him, but I was hoping to see a picture by him.
Oh,
Let's see, maybe one of the other.
oh, I'm sure the others are by him.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Now we're in business. Make this one a little bigger. That's amazing.
Ah, wow.
St. James Doyle, St. Helena's first black driver in an REO, 1982. It's house paint on metal panels.
Wait a minute.
This actually might be two sides. So Boxer on one side and Ram Rose on the other. This must be another two-sided one.
Yeah.
So they seem to have a lot of his art here in Ohio. I mean, in Atlanta. Wow, look at that. Paint on a metal medicine cabinet. That's great. And the Reverend Albert Wagner, the son of Arkansas sharecroppers, was recently featured in a retrospective at the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. All my life I wanted to paint, he once said. I just didn't know how. God gives directions, and you have to follow them. Wow, those are pretty intense.
Interesting. Yeah.
Whoosh. American Justice Now and Then, Cecilia, and Oh My Goodness, We're Leaving Again. Wow.
Yeah, that's.
There's a picture of the Reverend.
Yes, but look what he's depicting.
Yep. That's pretty intense. Wow. The big picture.
Yeah.
Is it the Exodus from Egypt?
Yeah.
Yes.
It looks like crossing the Red Sea. And
Yes.
it looks as though that picture is in a corner. Am my eyes deceiving me?
Yes, that might be. Go back to the bottom. Oh, yeah, that does look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can see.
But it's also obviously that that the journey is completed. It's not starting.
Right. We're still in the midst. He was born in 1924. He went to work in the cotton fields as a water carrier for the pickers when he was 10 years old. 1941, at the age of 17, he moved with his family to Cleveland, where he worked as a dishwasher before starting his own furniture moving company. Years later, while cleaning his basement in preparation for his 50th birthday celebration, he noticed some paint spatters on a piece of wood and was suddenly overwhelmed with memories of his childhood and with inspiration for works of art. In the years that followed, he made hundreds of paintings and sculptures to get the word out, turning his house on Cleveland's East Side into an environment he called the People Love People House of God. The Reverend Albert Wagner decorated the outside of the building with found objects. He crammed the interior with enormous sculptures around which he counseled members of his small informal congregation, which met regularly at a nearby storefront church. Albert worked in his home studio, creating over 3,000 paintings and sculptures for 32 years until his death on September 1st, 2006, at age 82. And this is the quotation we had before there. Wow, pretty amazing.
Really.
All right. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this is a common belief among self-taught artists of the rural South, where religious faith underpins so much of daily life. I was out in the driveway with some old pieces of stone when I heard a voice telling me to pick up my tools and start to work on a tombstone. I looked up in the sky, and right there in the noon daylight, he, I mean God, hung a tombstone out for me to make, Mr. Edmondson once said. This is I remember this seems like we see this in the Bible also, where Moses is given all the instructions for the various pieces of art that are supposed to be in the tabernacle. So God is giving these Israelites the blueprints. Whether that kind of confidence comes from a faith in God or faith in the artist's own genius, it is a powerful force for remaining true to your own vision, no matter how the world might ignore or misunderstand or revile it. Even more than technique or approach or style, that steadfast commitment to originality can link artists as disparate as a restless modernist from Spain and the son of enslaved people from Nashville. In 1931, the year William Edmondson took up carving tools, Pablo Picasso was completing a painting called the Sculpture, in which the rounded figures representing the sculptor's work might have been shaped from Tennessee limestone. Sorry, this computer that I'm using is not very helpful. There you go. Such a great picture.
Why do you think it's great?
I like the sort of evocation of an artist's studio and what appears to me to be the sky outside and kind of maybe even a deck with those parallel lines or those sort of the lines out in the in the green part, and the way that the sculpture, his head is looks like a kind of a classical sculpture, yet his sculptures are obviously more like what Picasso would produce, and then the rest of his body is these lumpy blobs, nothing like the classical form of his head. I mean, I'm not much of an art historian or anything like that, but I find this one to be quite compelling for some reason.
It's breaking things down into elements.
Yeah. And disparate elements, right? Like very different types of shapes and different types of in the different figures. And he even has like this black sort of marbly type of thing down here. It's like a piece of marble. It's really interesting. And then this picture, I guess this must be a picture up here. Oops, sorry. When I was in a graduate writing program back in the mid-1980s, it was a cultural commonplace to believe that a writer's social responsibility included giving voice to the voiceless. We now understand the error of that thinking. Nobody is voiceless. There are only people whose voices are not heard. There you can see sorry, again, this computer doesn't offer me much in the way of.
No, that is interesting lettering, though.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
Now you can see the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I find that just amazing. It's like these balloon letters. It's so sad that it's lying on the ground and not upright.
Well, the entire cemetery looks as though it's kind of neglected. I mean, the
Yeah.
not trimmed. Uh, it just sort of looks like nobody is in charge here.
And you have the Jewish cemeteries in Belarus. And those tombstones were used as paving.
Yep. If you want to erase people's history, right? You get rid of their grave markers and use them for some other purpose.
Yeah, but we did that here too.
Oh yeah, 100%. It would be great to say that we were not part of that, but it's a human thing, unfortunately. None of the self-taught artists I've mentioned here have been ignored. Their work hangs in private collections and prestigious museums in more places than I have room to note. But in 2018, Nashville nearly sold the site of William Edmondson's home and studio to developers, and it was impossible not to notice the juxtaposition between the sold-out galleries of Picasso's figures at the Frist, where these fiercely treasured works have been hung with such tender care, and the empty cemeteries where so many of William Edmondson's headstones sit out in the wind and the rain, keeping company with groundhogs and growing fainter with every winter storm under every brutal summer sun. I found myself wondering about the people buried beneath those stones, people whose lives never ended up in a history book and whose creative life, whatever form it may have taken, never made it into a museum catalog. As Thomas Gray writes, an elegy written in a country churchyard, and we can look at that in a minute, a poem I used to teach my high school students. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness in the desert air. These lines are a reminder of how often the context into which artists are born determines both the expression of their genius and its reception by others. Shakespeare would still be Shakespeare wherever and whenever he arrived in the world, but he arrived during the literary flowering of Elizabethan England, and there's no separating his art from the stage for which he made it. The last cemetery Betsy and I visited is bounded on one side by a busy commute to thoroughfare, but somehow it seems to exist apart from both traffic and time. The creek that runs along the other side was rushing with rainwater, and white-tailed deer were lifting their heads and sniffing the air before picking their way through the light, through the trees, and out of sight. That's the end. So we can look at this poem.
It's over to one side. Oh, there it is.
So this is written, I think, in the early 1800s, late 1700s. I can't remember exactly.
Mid to late 17.
Yeah.
Basically his.
Elegy, we can probably probably have his dates here.
His dates are 1716 to 1771.
Oh, thank you.
I happen to be taking a poetry class. Poetry at this point, and this
I was going to say, Naomi, I'm so impressed. You know the dates. There he is. And indeed, you're correct, right? 1716 to 1771, and there's a picture of him. Good-looking guy. All right. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lay. The plowman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower the moping owl does to the moon complain of such as wandering near her secret bower molest her ancient solitary reign. Oh my gosh. Beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a moldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, his rude forefathers of the hamlet's sleep. The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the straw-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion, or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed. For them no more the blazing hearth shall burn, or busy housewife play her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield, their furrow oft the stubborn bleed has broke. How jocund did they drive the team of fields, how bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys, their destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Nor you, ye proud, impute to these the fault, if memory o'er their tomb no trophies raise, where through the long-drawn aisle in fretted vault, the pealing anthem swells the note of praise. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Can honor's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? Perhaps in this neglected spot is laid some heart once pregnant with celestial fire, hands that the rod of empire might have swayed, or wake to ecstasy the living lyre. But knowledge to their eyes, her ample page, rich with the spoils of time, did ne'er unroll. Chill penury repressed their noble rage, and froze the genial current of the soul. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen, and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Some village Hampton with that dauntless breast, the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. The applause of listening senates to command, the threats of pain and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty o'er a smiling land, and read their history in a nation's eyes, their lot forbade, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined, forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne, and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenious shame, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. Yet even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected high, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. Their name, their years spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply. And many a holy text around she strews that teach the rustic moralist to die. For who to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ere resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. On some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious drops the closing eye requires. Even from the tomb the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes live their wonted fires. For thee who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate, if chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate. Haply some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. There at the foot of yonder nodding beech that wreathes its old fantastic roots so high, His listless length at noontide would he stretch and pour upon the brook that babbles by. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove, now drooping woeful wan like one forlorn, or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless love. One morn I missed him on the customed hill, along the heath and near his favorite tree. Another came, nor yet beside the rill, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. The next with dirges due in sad array, slow through the churchway path we saw him borne, approach and read, for thou canst read the lay, graved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. The epitaph, here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair science frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Large was his bounty and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. He gave to misery all he had, a tear he gained from heaven, 'twas all he wished, a friend. No farther seek his merits to disclose, or draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. All right.
Good.
Bless you, Ellen.
Good.
All right, so Naomi, was this one of the poems that you learned in
Yeah,
your class?
this was one of the ones that we read.
Really? It's a very long poem and it really needs to be discussed.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to discuss. Do you want me to put it back on the screen, or do you want to discuss it without it?
I would like to do it more little by little. You're
Yeah.
not going to get a real discussion of that
No,
long
can't get-
poem.
Yeah, it's a little long to do a full discussion in
Right.
10 minutes, but it definitely, I mean, what I love about it is this notion, right, of the I mean, it might be a bit simplistic of a reading, but that they're, in this country churchyard, right, we have these people, and that every one of them has their story. Every one of them, lived a life, and just because they're not known to fortune or to fame, right, they are still worthy of being remembered, and they're in this place, and it does remind me of so many people who pursue art, right, even if they never become famous, even if they never end up in galleries, or sometimes even if they do, right, they are, I mean, I hadn't heard of any of the artists that she writes about today, so it was such a privilege to, I've read this poem before, but this is more in my line, right, than self-taught artists. First of all, I'm not an art historian. Second of all, I'm not from the South, and those are just, was not aware of those artists before. But reactions, Naomi, Sandy, any reactions?
Well, what he's doing is or among the things he's doing is just pointing out that simple people also have lives and souls.
Yes.
And as you just said, the fact that we don't know anything about them, A, does not mean that they did not exist, and B, does not mean that they did not have within themselves the same kind of intellect or drive or whatever that led to someone like Cromwell or Milton.
Right.
But they were here, they were poor. Actually, there's a 20th century collection called Spoon River Anthology.
Yeah.
Which basically does the same kind of thing. Takes very simple people and writes their stories.
Yeah.
In verse.
What do you mean by simple people? I think we're all kind of complicated.
Well, that's one thing he's saying, except that instead of being great intellectuals or great parliamentarians or great generals, these were people who had to be great plowmen.
Right. I mean, I'm reading a book right now called The Vanishing Half. And it's a story of two twins, and they run away from their little town where they grew up until they were 16, and they moved to New Orleans, and then they go on from there. But in the first months that they were in New Orleans, they're described by the people that encounter them as, simple country folk, right? Which is not necessarily meaning that they're not complicated people, right? But just that they, they're used to a life in the country that is sort of bounded, and the kind of freedoms and possibilities that life in New Orleans offers them, right, is very different. And so I think that was what Naomi had in mind when she said simple, right? And then when one of the twins moves back to her hometown, nobody in the town can believe that she sticks around for more than a month, because she must be so bored by the simplicity of their life, when she had spent all kinds of time in other cities.
I'm just thinking that on the Lower East Side, this would have been a greenhorn.
Yes, right. Exactly.
And
And
when
it's
they
interesting,
moved
right?
up to the Bronx, they became poets and artists. They were not simple people. You just didn't know what was going on, and they had very little opportunity.
Right.
That's it.
That's exactly the point, right?
That's
Is that the simplicity is not inside them, right? The simplicity is the context in which they were born, or the limitations that held them back. I mean, this one about
this one verse here that you just went past.
That's the one I was looking for, right here, right? Some village Hampton.
That's one of them. Wait a minute, let me find the other one. But yeah, that's one of the ones that's very definitely. Where are we here? We are at.
Right, some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, right?
Yeah.
All the poems that never got written by people who, for this reason or that reason, never felt like they could put words down on paper. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of the self-taught artists or poets in particular. I'm thinking of hip hop artists, who have this amazing verbal dexterity, and have the capacity to make these incredible flights of verbal artistry. But we would never, it was only in the 1980s, right, when it began to happen that people would record them and distribute them. And now we have access to these incredible texts that I'm sure people have been making for decades and decades, and they were just consumed, by the people who heard them rapping, and never any further afield than that.
Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking of people like Alan Lomax, who in the teens and 20s went around recording what we snobs would consider hillbilly music,
right?
Which, if you take it back far enough, become the Child's Border ballads. But again, just taking people who lived on mountaintops in what we would consider shanties,
right?
And had this marvelous poetic tradition,
right.
And
the amazing musical traditions that at least I still draw on today, and I'm sure many other people who play music do. This was a real fount of American music, and the mixing of the European and the African, has been amazing source of creativity.
I just want to point out that hip hop started in the Bronx.
Did it really? I mean, that's interesting. hip hop, you mean in the sense of recording, or in the sense
No,
of
of the
that
music.
of just that sort of beatbox genre where interesting.
That would probably be more of an urban origin.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And,
Although it's interesting, each city now has its own
yeah,
distinct, sort of subgenre of hip hop.
yeah.
But back in the 80s, right? Was Run DMC from the Bronx, Sandy?
Say it again.
Were Run DMC from the Bronx?
I don't know.
Okay. But I think right, the Bronx was very important in that history of that music.
Yeah. But you had each city had its own form of jazz.
Absolutely.
As you came up the Mississippi, you started
Yep.
from New Orleans, and then you got to Memphis, and
Yep.
I don't think Minneapolis ever made it, but there were a
Who
lot.
knows? You never know.
Each city had its own particular form of jazz, which the experts can tell apart. I can't.
Right. I can't necessarily. Yeah, no. Definitely. I mean, you can tell New Orleans, right, with the ragtime sort of thing, but or the Dixieland. But it's it's and I'm sure that was true in Europe as well. Different styles in different cities, and it's interesting. It's interesting to me that in hip hop, there's still such strong traditions, local traditions of hip hop. Sort of the Atlanta, the Houston, the Detroit, and that even though we have this sort of national culture, right, the local thing still goes. Supposedly, we even have our own Boston style, although I can't really tell it apart.
Yeah. But in Europe, you also had a generation of composers like Bela Bartok, who started going back to Hungarian folk songs.
Right.
And listening to the peasants, as it were.
Right. Janacek and I think he was in the Czech lands, and Copeland here did that, right? So,
Yes. Come to think of it. Yeah.
So I think there's always going to be this sort of going, deep and going back for inspiration. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and we will reconvene next week for on Monday again, and I'll be back at Cohen. I won't be in Roslindale next week. This is only because of Victory Day. So, everyone.
Right.
Yes, Victory Day was yesterday. Victory Day and Mother's Day all in one. So,
wow.
Yeah.
My God, how quickly they forget.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. See you soon.
Well, we haven't had a victory for so long.
That's true. This is really the Soviet victory. It's
yeah. Which we don't
uh,
want to admit, but
we don't really celebrate our victories except for, I guess, July 4th. But we used to, I guess Armistice Day, right? That was the Veterans Day is Armistice Day, so I guess that's a victory.
Right. Yeah. When I was a kid, it was Armistice Day. It was always
All right, sounds good.
Day. I'm sorry, it was Decoration Day.
VA Veterans Day was Decoration
Day. Then
That's
it
right.
became Armistice Day.